In the summer of 2025, two guys who built a cartoon empire out of construction paper cutouts posted a message on social media that read, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, "This merger is a shit show, and it's effing up South Park." That was Trey Parker and Matt Stone, billionaires, Broadway legends, Oscar nominees, owners of an actual Mexican restaurant in Colorado, talking about a corporate acquisition that was threatening to blow up the single most valuable property in cable television history. And here's what gets me about that moment. These are two guys who started making cartoons in their dorm room at the University of Colorado back in 1992, literally cutting out pieces of construction paper and moving them around frame by frame with an old 8mm film camera. And now they were in a standoff with one of the largest media conglomerates on the planet over a deal that was initially valued at $3 billion. $3 billion. For a show about four foul-mouthed kids in a fictional Colorado town where people get probed by aliens and a kid dies practically every episode. I need you to sit with that for a second, because the story of how we got from construction paper to $3 billion is, and I mean this sincerely, one of the most insane stories in the history of entertainment. It's a story about contracts and loopholes, about streaming wars and corporate greed, about two guys who somehow kept total creative control of their show for nearly 3 decades while also becoming the highest paid creators in television history. And there's a single sentence buried in a contract from 1997 that made all of it possible. So that's what we're doing tonight. We're going through the entire financial and creative war behind South Park, from the very first deal with Comedy Central all the way to the $1.5 billion Paramount arrangement in 2025. And I'm warning you now, this one goes deep. We're talking about the early merchandising gold rush, the fight over a talking poo character, the Oscar nomination that changed everything, the streaming revolution that turned a throwaway contract clause into hundreds of millions of dollars, a lawsuit between two of the biggest media companies on Earth fought literally over the definition of the word episode, and the Skydance merger drama that almost killed the whole thing. If you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, maybe grab something to drink, because we're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed to Papertown yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Every subscribe, every like, it matters more than you'd think for a channel like ours. Okay, let's start at the very beginning, because the beginning is wilder than most people remember. The year is 1992. Trey Parker is a film student at the University of Colorado at Boulder. He and Matt Stone, who he'd met through a mutual friend, are both into comedy, both into pushing boundaries, and both deeply, obsessively into animation, but not the polished Disney kind. They made something that year called The Spirit of Christmas, sometimes called Jesus versus Frosty, and it was exactly as crude as you're imagining. Construction paper, stop motion, an 8mm camera. 4 kids who vaguely resemble what would eventually become Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny standing around while Jesus and Frosty the Snowman have a fight to the death. It was a student film. It screened during a December 1992 student film event at the university, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because 3 years later, in 1995, a Fox executive named Brian Graden saw that short and loved it. And Graden did something kind of unusual. He commissioned Parker and Stone to make another version of the short, this time as a video Christmas card he could send to his friends. They called it The Spirit of Christmas again, this one sometimes referred to as Jesus versus Santa, and it was sharper, funnier, more polished in that deliberately unpolished way that would eventually become South Park's signature look. Graden sent it to about 80 people, and here's the thing, this was 1995. The internet existed, but it was still in its infancy. There was no YouTube, no social media, no TikTok, and somehow, that little video Christmas card became one of the first viral videos in internet history. People were copying it onto VHS tapes, emailing it to friends, passing it around offices. It spread the way things used to spread before we had a word for viral, person to person, copy to copy, until everyone in Hollywood had seen it. Fox was thrilled. They invited Parker and Stone in for a meeting about developing a series based on the short. This should have been the moment where South Park became a Fox show, right? Imagine that timeline. South Park on the same network as The Simpsons and The X-Files. But here's what happened, and I love this story because it tells you everything about who Trey and Matt are as people. During the meeting at Fox's offices in Century City, the network told them they couldn't include a supporting character, a talking piece of poop named Mr. Hanky. Fox said no. Absolutely not. We're not putting a singing, dancing piece of poo on television. And Parker and Stone said, well, then we're done here. They walked out. They refused to compromise on a character that most people would consider the most disposable, juvenile element of the entire concept. That's not stubbornness, by the way. That's a philosophy. And that philosophy would guide every single negotiation they'd ever have for the next 3 decades. You don't tell us what we can and can't put in our show. Period. So they left Fox and started shopping the series elsewhere. And after months of being passed around, the short film caught the attention of Comedy Central. Now, in 1997, Comedy Central was not what you'd call a powerhouse network. It existed, sure, but it was known mostly for stand-up specials and reruns. It didn't have a flagship show. It didn't have a cultural footprint. What it had was a willingness to take a risk on 2 unknown guys from Colorado with a cartoon made of paper. Comedy Central signed them, and on August 13th, 1997, the first episode of South Park aired. It was called the pilot episode. Season 1, Episode 1. The show that would generate billions of dollars in revenue began with an episode about a kid getting abducted by aliens and having a satellite dish implanted inside him. And I genuinely cannot think of a more perfect origin story for what this show turned out to be. Think about what Comedy Central was getting. They were getting a show that looked like it was made by children, on purpose. The characters were geometric shapes with simple dot eyes. The backgrounds were flat and childlike. The animation was jerky and minimal. Everything about the visual presentation screamed low budget, amateur, disposable. And yet, the writing was razor sharp. The comedy was transgressive in a way that television hadn't seen before. It wasn't just shock value, although there was plenty of that. It was shock value deployed with precision, aimed at specific targets, with actual points to make underneath the profanity and the toilet humor. Comedy Central recognized that before anyone else did. They saw through the crude surface to the intelligence underneath, and they were willing to bet on it when Fox, which had vastly more resources and reach, wasn't. That decision, that willingness to embrace something that looked like a disaster, but sounded like a revolution, is one of the smartest programming decisions in cable television history. The initial order was for 6 episodes. 6. That's how tentative Comedy Central was. They liked the concept. They saw the buzz from the viral short, but this was still a bet, a small one. And within weeks, it was clear the bet had paid off beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The Nielsen ratings for that first season rose from a 1.3 for the premiere to a 6.4 by the 10th episode. To put that in context, Comedy Central's highest rated programming at the time was pulling maybe a 1.0 or a 1.5. South Park didn't just succeed for Comedy Central. It essentially put Comedy Central on the map. The network went from being an afterthought in cable television to being a destination, because of a show made with construction paper. An additional 7 episodes were quickly ordered after the initial 6, bringing Season 1 to 13 episodes total, running from August 1997 through February 1998, and the show won a Cable Ace Award for Best Animated Series that very first season. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Parents were horrified, and everybody was watching. And here's where the money story really begins, because with that kind of success came the first real contract negotiation. And this is the part that, honestly, when I was researching this, made my jaw drop. Because what happened in 1997 would echo through the next 3 decades in ways nobody could have predicted. Parker and Stone had a lawyer. His name was Kevin Morris. And Morris was not your typical Hollywood entertainment attorney. He was shrewd, he was unconventional, and he had a very specific vision for how his clients should be protected. When they sat down to negotiate their first long-term deal with Comedy Central in early 1998, Morris slipped a clause into the contract. Just one line. One sentence that, at the time, seemed completely worthless. The clause gave Parker and Stone a 50% cut of any revenue generated apart from the actual show's television broadcast. Now, think about what that means in 1998. What revenue exists outside of television broadcast? Basically nothing. Home video, maybe. Syndication, potentially. down the road. But the internet was still dial-up. There was no streaming. There was no digital distribution. There was no YouTube. No Hulu. No Netflix as we know it. No Paramount Plus. That clause was protecting Parker and Stone's share of a market that didn't exist yet. For nearly a decade, it was worth exactly $0. And that's what makes it so wild, or maybe the insane gamble of it. Because Kevin Morris was essentially betting on the future. He was betting that television would eventually move beyond television. And he was right. He was so spectacularly right that that single clause would eventually be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But we'll get there. Let me not jump ahead, because the road between 1998 and the moment that clause started paying off is its own wild story. The deal they signed in April 1998 contracted them to produce South Park through 1999. It gave them a slice of the merchandising revenue, which was already starting to become significant, and an unspecified seven-figure cash bonus to bring the show to the big screen. Because everybody could see where this was headed. South Park was a phenomenon. By the end of 1998, Comedy Central had sold more than $150 million worth of merchandise. T-shirts, dolls, hats, posters. The top-selling specialty t-shirt in the United States was a South Park t-shirt. $30 million in t-shirt sales alone during the first season. I need to repeat that. $30 million in t-shirts for a show that had existed for less than a year. This was not just a hit television show. This was a merchandising empire that materialized almost overnight. And I want to pause here and talk about something that I think gets overlooked in the South Park story, which is the sheer speed of it all. Parker and Stone went from unknown film students to the creators of a national cultural phenomenon in less than 3 years. From the 1995 Christmas card short to having the highest-selling t-shirt in America. That kind of velocity almost never happens, and when it does, it usually destroys the people at the center of it. It happened with so many overnight successes in the 90s. You blow up. The money comes flooding in. The network starts making demands. The creative vision gets diluted. The creators burn out or sell out, and within a few years, the whole thing collapses. And honestly, that's what a lot of people expected would happen with South Park. The first season was a sensation. The second season was still pulling massive numbers. And then ratings started to dip in season 3. The premiere of season 3 drew 3.4 million viewers, down from the 5.5 million who had watched the previous season premiere. The media narrative was already forming. South Park was a fad, a flash in the pan. It would burn bright and burn out. That narrative was wrong, obviously. We know that now because the show is still on the air nearly 30 years later. But the point is, in those early years, the conventional wisdom was that South Park's best days were already behind it. And that matters for the contract story, because it meant Comedy Central was negotiating from a position where they believed the show was declining. And Parker and Stone were negotiating from a position where they had Kevin Morris, a lawyer who thought in decades, not quarters. And this is one of those moments where I think the business story and the creative story are deeply intertwined. Because the reason South Park survived that early ratings dip is that Parker and Stone genuinely didn't care about the ratings. I mean, they cared in the sense that they wanted people to watch the show. But they weren't chasing numbers. They weren't changing the show to be more accessible, or less offensive, or more in line with what focus groups wanted. They were making the show they wanted to make. And paradoxically, that's what kept the audience. Because the audience could feel it. They could feel that this wasn't a corporate product designed to maximize advertising revenue. It was two guys doing something they believed in. And that authenticity created a loyalty that transcended ratings fluctuations. South Park fans didn't leave when the show dipped from a 6.4 to a 3.4. They stayed because they trusted the show. They trusted that it would keep being real. And that trust is what made the long-term contract negotiations possible, because Comedy Central knew that South Park's audience was sticky. They might not be growing, but they weren't leaving either. And in the cable television business, a reliable, loyal audience is worth its weight in gold. There's something else about this period that I want to highlight, because it gets at the heart of why South Park became so much more valuable than anyone expected. During seasons 2 and 3, While the ratings were adjusting from their initial spike to a more sustainable level, the quality of the writing was actually getting better. The first season was chaotic and raw, which was its charm. But by season 2, Parker and Stone were figuring out what the show could really do. Episodes like Gnomes in season 2 introduced the Underpants Gnomes and their now iconic business plan. Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. That became one of the most widely referenced jokes in business culture. An episode of a crude cartoon about kids in Colorado produced a framework that executives at major corporations would reference in boardrooms for the next 2 decades. And it happened during the period when people were writing South Park off as a fad. The show was getting better at exactly the moment the cultural conversation said it was getting worse. That gap between perception and reality is where Kevin Morris operated. He knew the show was getting better. He knew it was building the kind of cultural permanence that would make it valuable for decades. And he structured the deals accordingly. But before we get to the next round of contract negotiations, we need to talk about the movie, because the movie changed everything. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, hit theaters on June 30th, 1999. It was produced on a budget of $21 million and grossed $83 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing R-rated animated film at that point in history. And here's the thing that kills me about this movie. It's not just a commercial success. It's genuinely one of the best animated musicals ever made. I know that sounds ridiculous, given that it features a song called Uncle Fucka, but Trey Parker wrote those songs with Mark Shaman, and they are legitimately brilliant pieces of musical comedy. Blame Canada was nominated for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards. Let me say that again. A song from a South Park movie was nominated for an Oscar. Robin Williams performed it at the ceremony, with black tape over his mouth, turning his back to the audience when the profanities were sung. It lost to Phil Collins's "You'll Be in My Heart" from Tarzan, and if you ask South Park fans about that, you'll still get angry responses 27 years later. The movie proved something crucial. It proved that South Park wasn't just a television phenomenon. It was a brand, a franchise, an intellectual property with legs that extended far beyond Wednesday nights on Comedy Central. And that changed the math on every negotiation that followed. Because suddenly South Park wasn't just worth whatever advertising revenue it generated on cable. It was worth whatever you could do with it across every medium. Movies, merchandise, games, international distribution, and eventually, streaming. But nobody was thinking about streaming in 1999. Not yet. And there's something else about the movie that people don't talk about enough. It proved that Trey Parker was a genuine musical talent. I mean, the guy had already shown flashes of it in the show, but the movie's soundtrack was on another level. Blame Canada, Uncle Fucka, What Would Brian Boitano Do, La Resistance. These weren't novelty songs. They were legitimately well-crafted musical comedy numbers that could hold their own against anything coming out of Broadway at the time. And that musical talent would eventually lead to The Book of Mormon, which would lead to 9 Tony Awards, which would lead to even more leverage in contract negotiations. Everything connects. Every piece of the South Park story feeds into every other piece. The Oscar nomination for Blame Canada wasn't just a funny anecdote. It was a data point that increased the brand's value. But here's the thing about the late 90s that I think people forget. Comedy Central was trying to figure out what to do with Parker and Stone as people, not just as creators. The network had set up the show during its first season to operate like a traditional sitcom with staff writers. They hired a room of writers, the way you would for any network comedy, and Parker and Stone hated it. They didn't work that way. Their creative process was more intuitive, more collaborative in a specific way that didn't fit the traditional writer's room model. Staff writers would come in and pitch ideas, and Parker and Stone would listen politely, and then go off and write whatever they wanted anyway. It wasn't personal. It was just that South Park's voice was so specific, so tied to Parker and Stone's particular sensibility, that it couldn't be delegated. Most of those original staff writers were let go before season 2, and from that point forward, Parker and Stone ran the show essentially as a 2-person operation, bringing in people they trusted on an as-needed basis, rather than maintaining a permanent writing staff. That's extraordinarily unusual for a network show. And it meant that every word of dialogue, every plot point, Every satirical target was chosen by the two people who owned half the company. The creative side and the business side were inseparable. They've always been inseparable. I actually had to stop and think about this while researching, because it's such a clean illustration of why South Park's business model works. When you have a traditional show with a staff of 12 writers and an executive producer, and a network giving notes, and an advertising department that has opinions about content, the creative product gets diffused. It becomes the result of compromise. South Park was never the result of compromise. It was the unfiltered output of two specific brains. And that specificity is what makes it valuable. You can't replace it, you can't committee it, you can't produce it without Parker and Stone. And that irreplaceability is the foundation of every billion-dollar deal. I've been thinking a lot about this period while putting this video together, the early 2000s, because it's the era where South Park stopped being a fad and started being an institution. And that transition happened quietly. The ratings stabilized. They weren't at season 1 levels anymore, but they were consistent. The show was pulling solid numbers for Comedy Central, still among the highest rated programs on the network. And the quality, honestly, the quality was getting better. Seasons 4 through 8 are, in my opinion, where South Park really found its voice. The satire got sharper, the character work got deeper. The show figured out how to be topical in a way that felt immediate and dangerous, partly because of that insane 6-day production cycle. And I want to take a detour here to talk about the animation, because the evolution of how South Park looks is actually a business story, disguised as a technical one. The show started, as we've discussed, with actual construction paper. Cut it out, move it slightly, photograph it, repeat. The pilot took about 3 months to produce. 1 episode. 3 months. That's obviously not sustainable for a weekly series. So when the show got picked up, they transitioned to computers almost immediately. The early computer animation used Corel Draw to scan and redraw the paper cutouts, then imported them into Power Animator on SGI workstations. It still looked like construction paper. That was always the point. But now they could do it faster. Then, before Season 5 in 2001, the entire animation department had to learn Autodesk Maya, which is a much more powerful 3D animation program. The season was actually delayed several months, so the staff could master the new software. And here's what's interesting about that decision. Maya is the same software used to create photorealistic visual effects in Hollywood blockbusters. You could use it to make things that look absolutely real, but South Park used it to make things that deliberately looked like they were made out of construction paper. It's a sophisticated tool deployed in service of a deliberately unsophisticated aesthetic. And that choice, that commitment to looking crude, even when you have the technology to look polished, is one of the most brilliant creative decisions in the show's history, because it means South Park will never age the way other animated shows age. The Simpsons looks different in Season 35 than it did in Season 1. South Park looks essentially the same. The construction paper aesthetic is timeless because it was never trying to be cutting edge in the first place. The Maya transition also dramatically increased their production speed. In the early seasons, with a staff that was still learning the tools, an episode took about 3 weeks. By the mid-2000s, with a team of around 70 people who had mastered the pipeline, they could produce an episode in about a week. And eventually, as the tools got better and the team got more experienced, they pushed it down to the now legendary 6-day cycle, with some episodes being finished in as little as 3 or 4 days. That speed is the show's secret weapon, commercially and creatively, and it's only possible because of the deliberate choice to animate in a style that prioritizes speed and expressiveness over visual complexity. I also think about the animation when people dismiss South Park as lazy or poorly made. Look, I get why someone might glance at the show and think that. The characters are simple geometric shapes with dot eyes and barely articulated limbs. The backgrounds are flat. The movement is minimal. But that simplicity is doing more work than most people realize. When Cartman's eyebrows shift half an inch, that tells you everything about what he's thinking. When Kenny dies and his parka-muffled scream is the only soundtrack, the visual simplicity forces you to focus on the comedy. When the show suddenly breaks its own visual rules, like in Good Times with Weapons, The Season 8 premiere from March 17th, 2004, where the boys imagine themselves as anime warriors and the entire visual style shifts to gorgeous hand-drawn Japanese animation, the contrast is stunning precisely because the baseline is so stripped down. That episode has a 9.2 on IMDb, and Parker and Stone themselves listed it as their second favorite episode of the entire series. And it only works because of the construction paper aesthetic they committed to from day one. And I need to talk about that production cycle, because it's central to everything about how South Park operates and why the show has the kind of leverage it does in negotiations. Most animated shows take months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons, Family Guy, they work 6 to 9 months ahead. South Park produces each episode in 6 days. 6 days from concept to air. Trey Parker and Matt Stone come into the studio on a Thursday, and by the following Wednesday, the episode is on television. The 2011 documentary 6 Days to Air, directed by Arthur Bradford, follows this process in incredible detail. It premiered on Comedy Central on October 9th, 2011, and it shows Parker literally finishing episodes hours before they're supposed to air. The first episode they chronicle is Human Centipad, the season 15 premiere, and you watch Parker go through this agonizing creative process where he's rewriting, re-recording, reanimating, right up until the absolute last possible second. This production cycle is not just a quirky production detail. It's the reason South Park can respond to current events faster than any other scripted show on television. When something happens on a Monday, South Park can have an episode about it airing on Wednesday. No other show can do that. And that capability is what makes the show uniquely valuable to a network, because it means South Park is always relevant, always in the conversation, always the show that people are talking about on Thursday morning. You can't replicate that with any other animated series, and that gave Parker and Stone leverage that went far beyond what the raw ratings numbers would suggest. And there's another dimension to this that I want to explore, because it connects directly to the money. The 6-day cycle means that South Park doesn't need a massive animation staff working year-round the way The Simpsons or Family Guy does. The production footprint is relatively small, which means the profit margins are enormous. The show costs significantly less to produce per episode than most comparable animated series, but it generates comparable or greater advertising and licensing revenue. That cost efficiency is part of why Comedy Central and later Paramount have always been willing to pay top dollar in negotiations. South Park is not just valuable because of what it earns. It's valuable because of what it costs relative to what it earns. The return on investment is absurd, and Parker and Stone's production approach, which they developed out of creative necessity and stubbornness, turned out to be a financial advantage that would compound over decades. I keep thinking about how many things had to go right for this to work. The viral short had to happen before social media existed. Kevin Morris had to be paranoid enough about the future to insert that clause. Parker and Stone had to be stubborn enough to walk away from Fox. Comedy Central had to be desperate enough to take the bet. The animation software had to evolve in exactly the right way to enable the 6-day cycle. The streaming revolution had to happen. Any one of those things goes differently, and we're not having this conversation tonight. It's a reminder that success at this level isn't just talent plus hard work. It's talent plus hard work, plus a series of perfectly timed coincidences. But here's the thing. Parker and Stone were ready for every one of those coincidences. When opportunity showed up, they had the infrastructure to capture it. That's not luck. That's preparation meeting opportunity at the exact right moment over and over again for 3 decades. Now, the 2000s were also the decade where Parker and Stone proved they weren't just South Park guys. They made Team America, World Police in 2004, a puppet action movie that satirized American foreign policy and Hollywood celebrity activism. Look, that movie is unhinged in the best way possible. Marionettes having graphic sex. Puppet vomit. America, F yeah. It's the kind of project that only people with total creative freedom would attempt. And it didn't make a fortune at the box office, but it became a massive cultural touchstone. The kind of movie that people quote endlessly. It also demonstrated something important about Parker and Stone's brand. They could work in different mediums. They could move beyond South Park and still command attention. That matters in negotiations because it means they don't need South Park. They have options, and having options is the foundation of negotiating power. And then, in the late 2000s, they started working on what would become The Book of Mormon. That musical opened on Broadway at the Eugene O'Neill Theater in March 2011, and it swept the Tony Awards. 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, Best Book of a Musical, Best Original Score, Best Direction of a Musical, Best Scenic Design, Best Orchestrations, Best Lighting Design, Best Sound Design, and Best Featured Actress in a Musical. It won a Grammy for Best Musical Theater Album. It toured 13 countries. As of recent reports, it's the 10th longest running show in Broadway history. I bring this up not because the Book of Mormon is part of the South Park story directly, but because it fundamentally changed Parker and Stone's position in every negotiation going forward. They weren't just TV guys anymore. They were artists with proven success across multiple mediums. You don't lowball the guys who just won 9 Tony Awards. And here's a detail from the 6 Days to Air documentary that perfectly captures this duality. The documentary was filmed during the production of the season 15 premiere, and it opens with Parker and Stone leaving New York City after the opening night of the Book of Mormon. They're going from the pinnacle of Broadway success, standing ovations, critics losing their minds, 9 Tony Awards on the horizon, straight back to their animation studio in Los Angeles to start grinding out a new season of South Park. From the Eugene O'Neill Theater to the writer's room. From tuxedos to sweatpants. From Broadway royalty to staying up until 4 in the morning, trying to make a joke about the human centipede work. That's the energy. That's the whole thing. They can exist in the most prestigious creative space in America and the most irreverent at the same time, and both worlds pay them handsomely for it. Oh, and I should mention something else about the 2000s that fed directly into the contract negotiations. South Park entered broadcast syndication in September 2005. This was a big deal. The series was cleared in 85% of the country through deals with Tribune Entertainment and Debmar Mercury, airing on Viacom, Tribune, Weigel, and dozens of other station groups across the nation, including major markets like New York's WPIX, LA's KCAL, and Chicago's WCIU. The episodes had to be edited for broadcast standards, obviously. You can't air the uncut version of Scott Tenorman Must Die at 7 in the evening on a local Fox affiliate. About a dozen episodes were deemed too extreme to edit for broadcast at all. But the syndication deal meant South Park was reaching an entirely new audience, generating additional revenue streams, and further establishing itself as one of the most broadly commercially successful animated properties in television history. Kevin Morris's clause about non-broadcast revenue didn't apply to syndication in the same way it applied to digital, but the syndication deal still mattered for the broader contract picture. It proved the show's value extended beyond its original Comedy Central home, and it set the stage for the even more lucrative digital deals that were coming. The video games are another piece of the revenue puzzle that deserves attention. South Park, The Stick of Truth, developed by Obsidian Entertainment and published by Ubisoft after Ubisoft acquired the rights out of THQ's bankruptcy for $3.2 million, was released in March 2014 and sold over 5 million copies. It was a critical and commercial hit, praised for capturing the show's voice and visual style with uncanny accuracy. Parker wrote the script himself, and it felt like an interactive South Park movie. The sequel, South Park, The Fractured But Whole, developed by Ubisoft San Francisco, launched on October 17, 2017, and sold over 500,000 units in its first week alone. These games generated tens of millions in revenue, and through the South Park Digital Studios joint venture, Parker and Stone were getting their cut. Every revenue stream, every piece of the franchise that existed outside of the traditional television broadcast was generating money that split 50-50 through that 1997 clause. Games, merchandise, syndication, streaming, all of it adding up, year after year, deal after deal. Okay, so let's get back to the contracts, because 2007 is when everything changes. This is the year the 1997 contract clause went from being a meaningless piece of legal boilerplate to the most valuable sentence in television history. Here's the context. YouTube had launched in 2005 and exploded into a cultural force. Netflix had started its streaming service. The entire media industry was beginning to realize that the future of content distribution wasn't just cable television anymore. It was digital. And Parker and Stone's contract came up for renewal. Kevin Morris, their lawyer, walked into negotiations with Comedy Central and did something that would alter the course of entertainment history. He reminded them about that clause from 1997, the one that gave his clients 50% of any revenue generated outside of traditional television broadcast. And for the first time, that clause had real implications. Because if South Park was going to be distributed digitally, if it was going to be streamed, if it was going to be available online, then Parker and Stone were entitled to half of every dollar that generated. Comedy Central's parent company, Viacom, could have fought it. They could have tried to invalidate the clause or renegotiate it away. But the show was still one of their most valuable properties, and they needed Parker and Stone to keep making it. So instead of fighting, they made a deal. An ad-sharing deal that gave Parker and Stone a 50-50 split with Comedy Central on all digital revenue. 50-50. On everything digital. And in 2007, that was significant but not earth-shattering. In 2014, it became a goldmine. And in 2019, it became a license to print money. And I want to emphasize something about how extraordinary this was. In 2007, most creators in Hollywood were signing away their digital rights without even thinking about it. Digital revenue was still a rounding error in most entertainment contracts. The idea that streaming would eventually become the dominant form of content distribution seemed speculative at best. Studios and networks were including digital rights as a throwaway clause in their own deals, bundling them in with other ancillary rights without assigning them meaningful value. And here was Kevin Morris, on behalf of Parker and Stone, negotiating a deal that specifically carved out digital revenue as its own category with its own 50-50 split. He wasn't just thinking ahead. He was thinking in a completely different dimension from every other entertainment lawyer in town. And the fact that Viacom agreed to the terms suggests they didn't fully understand what they were giving away. In their defense, nobody did. Not in 2007, but Morris did. Or at the very least, he suspected. And that suspicion was worth billions. In 2007, as part of that renegotiation, Parker, Stone, and Viacom also formed a joint venture called South Park Digital Studios. This entity was specifically designed to manage and license the show's digital content, including streaming rights, games, online distribution, everything that existed outside of the traditional television broadcast. And the ownership was shared. Parker and Stone owned their half. Viacom owned theirs. But crucially, Parker and Stone had veto power over any streaming deals they found unfavorable. That's an extraordinary level of control for creators to have over their own content. Most showrunners in Hollywood don't own anything. They create a show, the network or studio owns it, and the creator gets paid a salary and maybe some back-end points that are structured to never actually pay out. Parker and Stone, because of Kevin Morris and that 1997 clause, had a fundamentally different arrangement. They were co-owners, partners, not employees, and that distinction would be worth billions. I remember reading about this and thinking, this is the part of the story that should be taught in business schools. Because what Kevin Morris did wasn't just good lawyering, it was visionary. He saw the digital future coming a decade before it arrived, and he built the contractual infrastructure to capture value from it. And Parker and Stone, to their credit, trusted him. They could have taken the easy money, signed a standard deal, and been perfectly wealthy. Instead, they bet on a future that nobody could see yet, and the payoff has been staggering. The first major digital deal came in 2014, when South Park Digital Studios signed an exclusive multi-year streaming agreement with Hulu. All 17 existing seasons of South Park moved to Hulu Plus as part of a deal worth more than $80 million. And remember, Parker and Stone were getting 50% of the revenue from that deal through their joint venture. The deal also included next-day access to new episodes, meaning that for the first time, viewers could watch South Park online legally the day after it aired. South Park was one of the first basic cable shows ever sold on DVD, one of the first in off-network syndication, and now one of the first to retain its own streaming rights. Kevin Morris pointed this out at the time, and he was right to be proud of it, because most shows' streaming rights are owned entirely by the studio. South Park's were shared, 50-50. And I want to pause here to make a point about timing, because the timing of the Hulu deal is so perfect, it almost seems fictional. The deal was announced on July 12th, 2014. Starting that day, all 244 episodes of South Park, all 17 seasons, became available for free on Hulu and on southpark.cc.com, the new address replacing the old southparkstudios.com. When season 18 premiered in September, both Hulu and the official site got day-after-air access. This was still relatively early in the streaming era. Hulu was competing with Netflix for subscribers, and getting the exclusive rights to South Park's entire library was a major competitive advantage. It was the kind of deal that made industry observers take notice. And Kevin Morris, in his statement about the deal, pointed out something that I think is profound. He said South Park was one of the first shows sold on DVD, the first basic cable show in off-network syndication, and the first to retain its streaming rights. First. At every inflection point in the evolution of media distribution, South Park was there first. And being first meant they got the best deals, because nobody else had established what those rights were worth yet. By the time other shows figured out that streaming rights were valuable, the price had already been set by the South Park precedent. Parker and Stone didn't just benefit from the streaming revolution. In a very real sense, they helped define its economics. And the thing about streaming in 2014 is that it was still growing. The real explosion was yet to come. Between 2014 and 2019, the streaming wars heated up dramatically. Netflix went from a convenient alternative to a global entertainment force. Amazon started producing original content. Disney was preparing to launch Disney Plus. Warner Media was developing HBO Max. NBC Universal was building Peacock. And every single one of these platforms needed content. Specifically, they needed catalog content. Beloved shows with deep libraries that would give subscribers a reason to sign up and stay subscribed. Shows like Friends, which NBC sold to Netflix and then bought back for HBO Max at enormous cost. Shows like The Office, which NBC pulled from Netflix to put on Peacock. Shows like Seinfeld, which Netflix paid over $500 million to license, and shows like South Park. And this is where I want to make a point that I think is really important for understanding the whole South Park financial story. The streaming wars were, fundamentally, a content arms race. Every platform was competing to acquire the most beloved properties, and the prices for those properties inflated dramatically over a very short period. In 2015, you could license a major catalog title for tens of millions of dollars. By 2019, the same titles were going for hundreds of millions. The market was overheated. And Parker and Stone, through South Park Digital Studios, were positioned to ride that wave of inflation because they controlled their own streaming rights. Most creators had no leverage in this situation. Their shows were owned by studios, and the studios cut the deals without the creators seeing a meaningful share. But Parker and Stone had the 50-50 split. They had veto power. They could play platforms against each other, letting Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, and eventually Paramount Plus compete for the right to stream their show. That competitive dynamic drove the price up far beyond what it would have been in a normal market, and it all traces back to that 1997 clause. I also want to point out something about the Hulu deal that I think is underappreciated. When the deal was announced, there was backlash from fans. South Park had previously been available to watch for free on southparkstudios.com. All episodes, all seasons, no paywall. And now they were moving behind Hulu's subscription wall. Fans were upset. They felt like something they'd had free access to was being taken away, and Parker and Stone caught some criticism for it. But here's the business reality. That free availability on southparkstudios.com was generating relatively modest ad revenue. The Hulu deal was worth over $80 million. The math wasn't close, and the free episodes had served their purpose. They'd kept the show culturally relevant during a period when traditional TV viewership was declining. They'd introduced new fans to the library. They'd maintained buzz, but the money was in exclusivity, and the 2014 market demanded that they move toward a paid model. The free era of internet content was ending, and Parker and Stone, once again, were ahead of the curve. They gave away content for free when free was the smart strategy, and they moved to paid when paid became the smart strategy. Adaptability, not just talent, is what separates the South Park story from every other creator story in Hollywood. Before I get to the HBO Max deal, I want to talk about something that was happening creatively during this period, because it matters for the business story in ways that aren't immediately obvious. In 2015, South Park did something radical. Season 19, which premiered on September 16th, 2015, introduced a serialized format that the creators called Serialized Light. Every episode connected to the next. There were running storylines, recurring themes, character arcs that developed across the entire season. The big addition was PC Principal, a character who showed up and immediately started checking everyone's privilege. And through him, the show mounted one of its most sustained pieces of social commentary. This was a huge departure from the show's traditional episodic format, where each week was essentially a standalone story. And it worked. Critics loved it. Fans were energized. Season 20, in 2016, went even further into serialization, introducing the member berries and weaving a season-long narrative around nostalgia, trolling, and the presidential election. I remember that season vividly, because it was the season where South Park tried to predict the outcome of the 2016 election and got it wrong. They had written the season assuming Hillary Clinton would win, and when Trump won instead, they had to scramble to rewrite in real time. The resulting season was messy, ambitious, occasionally brilliant, and sometimes frustrating. And it's a perfect example of both the strengths and limitations of the 6-day production cycle taken to its extreme. When you're writing an entire season as one continuous story, and the real world doesn't cooperate with your narrative, you're in trouble. Parker has been pretty open about the fact that the Season 20 experience made him rethink the full serialization approach. And that's why the show pulled back toward a more episodic format in the seasons that followed, mixing standalone episodes with loose thematic connections, rather than committing to a single narrative arc. But here's why the serialization experiment matters for the business side. Serialization makes a show more bingeable. It gives viewers a reason to watch every episode in order, to go back and rewatch, to subscribe to a streaming platform specifically so they can follow the story from beginning to end. It makes the library more valuable. And that increased value would show up directly in the next round of negotiations. There's also a financial angle to the serialization that I want to flag, because it connects to the contract story in a subtle but important way. Serialized shows are harder to syndicate. When every episode is standalone, you can air them in any order, and a new viewer can jump in anywhere. When episodes are connected, you need to start from the beginning, which favors streaming over traditional reruns. So by moving towards serialization, even temporarily, South Park was effectively shifting its long-term value from traditional syndication toward digital platforms, where Parker and Stone had their 50-50 revenue split. Whether that was intentional on a business level or just a creative decision that happened to have favorable business implications, I honestly don't know. But the timing is interesting. They started serializing right as the streaming wars were heating up, right as the value of digital catalog content was exploding. And when HBO Max came shopping for an exclusive streaming deal, they were bidding on a library that included several seasons designed to be binged. That bingeability factor almost certainly influenced the price. I should also talk about the show's cultural position during this period, because it matters for understanding why the streaming deals got so large. By the mid-2000s, South Park had achieved something truly rare. It was simultaneously a legacy show and a current events show. It had the nostalgia value of a property that had been on the air for nearly 2 decades, which meant older viewers had grown up with it and had deep emotional connections to the characters. But it also had the immediacy of a show that could comment on last week's news, which meant younger viewers who'd never seen the classic episodes were still tuning in. That combination is incredibly rare. Most long-running shows lose their relevance as they age. South Park kept its relevance because of the 6-day production cycle, which meant it was always part of the current conversation, while also accumulating a massive back catalog that new viewers could discover. For streaming platforms, that's the holy grail. A show with both a deep library and current buzz. That's what HBO Max was paying for. That's what Paramount Plus was paying for. Not just 327 episodes. The ongoing cultural conversation that South Park represents. In September 2019, Comedy Central renewed South Park for 3 more seasons, taking it through its historic 26th season and at least 327 episodes. Parker and Stone's official statement was classic them. They said, "Apparently our efforts to get our own show canceled have fallen short," and they looked forward to new cancellation opportunities in the next few years. Comedy Central's president, Kent Alterman, called South Park the greatest comedy in the history of television. And the show had been the highest-rated cable comedy in primetime for 6 consecutive years, with over 48 million fans across social media platforms, making it the most popular cable comedy series on every major platform. But the real action in 2019 wasn't the Comedy Central renewal. It was the streaming deal. Because in October 2019, Warner Media announced that HBO Max had acquired the exclusive domestic streaming rights to South Park's entire library. The price? Over $500 million. $500 million. For the rights to stream a show about 4 kids in Colorado. And remember the 50-50 split through South Park Digital Studios. Parker and Stone's share of that deal was approximately $250 million from one streaming contract, based on a clause their lawyer had inserted into a deal 22 years earlier when streaming didn't exist. If that's not the greatest contract clause in television history, I genuinely don't know what is. The HBO Max deal covered 23 seasons of the existing library, plus 3 additional seasons that had yet to air, with each of those new seasons expected to consist of 10 episodes. That last detail is important. Remember it, because it would become the basis of a $500 million lawsuit. I want to take a moment here, because I think people sometimes hear these numbers and they become abstract. 500 million, 900 million, a billion. They're just big numbers that don't feel real. But think about what they represent. In 1997, Comedy Central bought a show made of construction paper from 2 nobody film school graduates. In 2019, that same show's streaming rights alone were worth $500 million, and the guys who made it owned half of that. The compounding effect of creative control, plus smart legal representation, plus a show that just kept being relevant for 2 decades, plus the streaming revolution equals generational wealth beyond anything Parker and Stone could have imagined when they were cutting out paper figures in their dorm room. That's the story. That's the real story. Not just the money, but how the money was earned through creative integrity, strategic patience, and one very clever lawyer. But now, we have to talk about what happened next, because this is where the story gets really messy. And honestly, this is the part that blows my mind the most. Before I get to the Paramount deal, though, I need to talk about what happened to the show during COVID, because the pandemic era changed South Park in ways that go beyond just the content. When COVID hit in March 2020, most television production shut down. Live-action shows were completely halted. Even animated shows that work far in advance saw disruptions. But South Park, because of its uniquely lean production model, was positioned to respond faster than anyone else. Parker and Stone could work remotely. The animation team could operate with minimal in-person contact. The 6-day cycle didn't require the kind of large-scale coordination that other shows needed. And so while the rest of television was in crisis mode, South Park was actually thriving, creatively speaking. The pandemic gave them the kind of urgent, universally relatable material that the show feeds on. Everyone was living through the same thing. Everyone had opinions. Everyone was frustrated, scared, confused. Perfect South Park territory. On September 30th, 2020, South Park aired The Pandemic Special. This was during COVID, obviously, and the episode landed at exactly the right moment. It drew 2.3 million viewers on Comedy Central and scored a 2.1 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic, making it the highest rated episode of South Park in 7 years. Including simulcasts on MTV and MTV2, it reached over 4 million viewers. In the Live Plus 3 measurements, which include DVR playback within 3 days, the gross viewership grew to 5.3 million. It was the highest rated scripted telecast on ad-supported cable in all of 2020. South Park proved, in the most dramatic way possible, that after 23 years, it could still dominate the cultural conversation when it mattered most. And that proof was worth a lot of money. And the timing mattered too. The Pandemic Special wasn't just good television. It was a cultural event during a period when cultural events were almost impossible to create. Everything was canceled. Concerts, sports, movies, live events, all shut down. People were stuck at home, desperate for something to watch, something to talk about, something that acknowledged the reality they were living through. And South Park delivered, with construction paper and fart jokes and a plot that somehow managed to be both completely absurd and emotionally resonant. Randy Marsh started the pandemic by having sex with a pangolin, because of course he did. But underneath the absurdity, the episode captured something real about the frustration, the confusion, the dark comedy of living through a historical crisis. That's the show at its best. Taking something terrifying and making it manageable through laughter. Because in August 2021, Viacom CBS announced a new deal with Parker and Stone. And this one made everything that came before look like pocket change. The deal was worth more than $900 million over 6 years. $900 million. It was one of the richest deals in television history. It renewed South Park as a series on Comedy Central through its 30th season in 2027. And it included 14 original South Park films exclusive to Paramount Plus. 14 movies, and 2 of those films were scheduled to debut before the end of 2021. Matt Stone's response to the deal was perfectly on brand. In an interview, he essentially said that they now had the kind of money where they could do whatever they wanted. Creative freedom backed by financial freedom. The dream. And I should note that the 900 million number that got reported everywhere was actually somewhat conservative. A later analysis suggested the total deal value could be even higher when you factor in all the revenue streams, back-end participation, and the various components of the agreement. Some estimates place the full deal value closer to $935 million. But regardless of whether it's 900 million or 935 million, we're in the same stratosphere. This is generational wealth. Buy a restaurant and renovate it for 40 million. Start a deepfake company because it seems fun kind of money. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about this deal. $900 million is an insane amount of money. But it wasn't just about paying Parker and Stone. It was about Paramount Plus. Viacom CBS was in the process of rebranding CBS All Access as Paramount Plus and trying to compete in the streaming wars against Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus. They needed tentpole content. They needed something that would make people subscribe. And South Park, with its massive, passionate fan base and its proven ability to generate cultural moments, was their answer. Those 14 movies weren't just content. They were subscriber acquisition tools. Every time a new South Park movie dropped on Paramount Plus, it was a reason for millions of people to either subscribe or renew their subscription. That's the streaming economy. Content is currency. And South Park was gold. I want to contextualize this against what other streaming platforms were spending at the time, because it puts the South Park deal in perspective. Netflix was spending around $17 billion a year on content in 2021. Disney was spending over $30 billion. Amazon was spending billions on Lord of the Rings alone. In that environment, $900 million over 6 years was, relatively speaking, a reasonable investment for a guaranteed hit. You weren't gambling on an unknown quantity. You weren't developing something from scratch that might or might not find an audience. You were licensing South Park. You knew what you were getting. You knew it would perform. You knew it would generate press, social media buzz, and subscriber engagement. The certainty of the investment justified the price. And that certainty existed because Parker and Stone had spent 24 years building it. Every good episode, every cultural controversy, every viral moment, every meme, every water cooler conversation about last night's South Park, all of that accumulated cultural capital was being converted into financial capital through the Paramount deal. 24 years of creative work, monetized in a single contract. That's what $1.5 billion looks like when you trace it back to its source. It's not just money for future content. It's money for everything that came before. There's a moment that captures the energy of the 2021 deal perfectly, and I keep coming back to it. When the deal was announced during Viacom-CBS's second quarter earnings call in August 2021, it sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. This wasn't just a big deal. It was a statement deal. It was Viacom-CBS saying to Netflix, to Disney, to Amazon, to Apple, "We have South Park, and you don't, and we're willing to pay $900 million to keep it that way." The deal was announced at the same time Viacom-CBS was rebranding its streaming platform. Paramount Plus needed anchor content, tentpole properties that would drive subscriptions and justify the platform's existence alongside the streaming giants. And South Park was their answer. Not Star Trek, although that was part of the strategy too. Not Mission Impossible, although the franchise helped. South Park, a cartoon about kids in Colorado. That's what Paramount bet their streaming future on. And if that doesn't tell you everything about the power dynamic between Parker, Stone, and their corporate partners, I don't know what does. The first 2 Paramount Plus specials dropped in late 2021. South Park Post-COVID premiered on November 25th, 2021, and South Park Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, followed shortly after in December 2021. These were feature-length, set in the future, showing the boys as adults dealing with the long-term aftermath of the pandemic. They were darker and more ambitious than typical South Park episodes, and they proved that the feature-length format could work for the franchise on a streaming platform. And I want to talk about the post-COVID specials specifically, because they did something that South Park had never really done before. They imagined the future. Not in a throwaway gag way, but in a sustained, emotionally resonant way. Kyle is a whiskey-drinking loner. Stan is a middle-aged mediocrity, going through a divorce. Cartman has converted to Judaism and has a family. Kenny is a scientist working on multidimensional theory. And Butters? Butters is in a mental institution. The specials used this future setting to explore what happens to these characters when the absurdity of childhood gives way to the disappointments of adulthood. And here's what hit me hardest about it. Under all the jokes, under the COVID satire, and the time travel plot, there's a genuinely melancholic undercurrent about growing up and growing apart. About how the friendships that define your childhood can't survive the compromises of adult life. For a show that's built on the premise that its characters never age, that they're perpetually 8 years old, showing them as adults was a statement. It was Parker and Stone acknowledging that they've changed, that the world has changed, that the show exists in a different context now than it did in 1997. And they did it on Paramount Plus as part of a $900 million deal. The most emotionally mature thing the show has ever done was also a piece of content specifically designed to drive streaming subscriptions. I don't know how to feel about that, and I think that ambiguity is part of the point. Then, in 2022, came South Park, The Streaming Wars, in 2 parts. Part 1 dropped on Paramount Plus on June 1st, 2022, and Part 2 on July 13th, 2022. And I love that South Park literally made specials called The Streaming Wars, while being at the center of an actual streaming war. That's the kind of self-aware, meta-commentary that only this show can pull off. They were satirizing the very business dynamics that were making them billionaires. Randy Marsh going full nuclear Karen over water rights, while in reality, water rights were a stand-in for streaming rights. It's brilliant and obnoxious in equal measure, which is basically South Park's whole deal. But those specials also revealed a tension in the deal, because regular South Park seasons on Comedy Central were getting shorter. Season 25, which premiered on February 2nd, 2022, consisted of only 6 episodes and ran through March 16th of that year. Critics noticed. Fans noticed. The show that used to deliver 14-episode seasons was now giving Comedy Central 6 episodes and saving its more ambitious material for Paramount Plus. Season 26, which premiered on February 8th, 2023, was also 6 episodes. And this raised a question that nobody had fully thought through when the 2021 deal was signed. Were the Paramount Plus specials replacing regular episodes? Were they movies, or were they episodes by another name? Was South Park delivering on its obligations to all its partners? Warner Brothers Discovery didn't think so, and that's where the lawsuit comes in. In February 2023, Warner Brothers Discovery sued Paramount. The lawsuit alleged that Paramount had breached its $500 million HBO Max licensing deal by diverting South Park content to Paramount Plus. Here was the crux of the argument. The 2019 deal had given HBO Max exclusive streaming rights to 23 seasons, plus 3 new seasons of 10 episodes each. That's 30 new episodes that were supposed to go to HBO Max. But what actually happened was very different. Only 2 episodes from the first new season and 6 from the second were delivered. The third guaranteed season consisted of only 6 episodes, for a total of 14 instead of 30. Where were the missing episodes? They'd been turned into specials, and movies, and events on Paramount Plus. Warner Brothers alleged that Paramount engaged in what they called verbal trickery and grammatical sleight of hand. They said Paramount was characterizing new South Park content as movies, films, or events instead of episodes, specifically to avoid its obligations under the HBO Max deal. And honestly, I can see their point. If you're paying $500 million for exclusive streaming rights to new South Park episodes, and then the creators start making feature-length South Park content that walks, talks, and quacks like episodes, but calls itself something different and goes to a competing platform, you'd be pretty upset too. Paramount fired back with a counterclaim, alleging that Warner Brothers Discovery owed $52 million in unpaid fees for the streaming rights they did have. The whole thing was a mess. A $500 million mess, where 2 massive media companies were fighting over the definition of a word. Is a 60-minute piece of animated South Park content an episode or a movie? That question, absurd as it sounds, was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I want to dwell on this for a moment, because the verbal trickery argument is actually kind of fascinating from a legal perspective. Think about what Warner Brothers Discovery was saying. They paid $500 million for episodes. Paramount then started producing things that looked exactly like South Park episodes, had the same characters, the same animation style, the same writers, the same everything, but called them movies, or events, or specials. Warner Brothers argued that this was a deliberate end run around their contract. Paramount argued that the Paramount Plus content was genuinely different, longer in format, different in scope, and therefore not covered by the HBO Max deal. It's one of those legal disputes where both sides have a point, and the outcome hinges on definitions that nobody thought to nail down when the original deal was signed, because nobody anticipated the exact scenario that unfolded. This, by the way, is exactly the kind of contractual ambiguity that Kevin Morris spent his career exploiting on behalf of Parker and Stone. The difference is that this time, the ambiguity was working against one of their partners, rather than in their favor. The lesson? In the streaming age, the definition of what constitutes an episode of television is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody has fully figured out the answer yet. The case went before Justice Margaret Chan in State Supreme Court in Manhattan. In November 2023, she issued a partial ruling that went mostly in Paramount's favor. She determined that Paramount did not violate state consumer protection laws and did not engage in verbal trickery that could lead to confusion about which streamer held exclusive rights. She found that viewers could distinguish between the different offerings on each platform, but the case wasn't fully resolved. In a later ruling, she said that Paramount may have actively convinced the joint venture it operates with the show's creators to breach its contract with Warner Brothers. Discovery, which wasn't offered the opportunity to stream the specials. So some claims survived, and the case moved toward potential trial. And here's what makes this whole lawsuit so fascinating to me. Parker and Stone were, in a sense, the beneficiaries of both sides of this conflict. They had the HBO Max money. They had the Paramount Plus money. They had their 50% of digital revenue through South Park Digital Studios. The two corporations were fighting over the right to pay for their content, and Parker and Stone were getting paid by both of them. The clause from 1997 had created a situation where the creators had more leverage than any of the corporations trying to control their work. That's almost unheard of in Hollywood. Meanwhile, the specials kept coming, and they kept being good. South Park, joining the Panderverse. Dropped on Paramount Plus on October 27, 2023, taking on AI, the multiverse trend in Hollywood, and corporate diversity initiatives all at once. Cartman has disturbing dreams about a multiverse where Disney keeps race-swapping characters, and the special uses this premise to satirize everything from Kathleen Kennedy's stewardship of Star Wars to the genuine anxieties people have about artificial intelligence replacing human creativity. It's the kind of multi-layered satire that only South Park can pull off, where the surface-level comedy is offensive enough to generate headlines, but the actual argument underneath is surprisingly nuanced. South Park, not suitable for children, came out on December 20th, 2023, tackling OnlyFans culture and the world of online influencers. And then, on May 24th, 2024, we got South Park, The End of Obesity, which might be my favorite of all the Paramount Plus specials. It takes on the Ozempic and Wegovy craze, the pharmaceutical industry's relationship with weight loss drugs, and the fundamental unfairness of a healthcare system where life-changing medication is only available to people who can afford it. Cartman trying to get his hands on GLP-1 drugs is exactly the kind of premise that sounds like pure comedy, but turns into genuine social commentary. It hit #1 on Paramount Plus for movies. It's the kind of thing that makes you understand why this show is worth billions, because when it's firing on all cylinders, there's nothing else like it on television. And here's something that I noticed while researching the specials, and it's a small detail, but I think it reveals a lot. The Paramount Plus specials are better produced than regular South Park episodes. They have tighter scripts, more elaborate set pieces, more visual ambition. Post-COVID imagined an entire future version of South Park with new character designs, new locations, new technology. The End of Obesity had a sustained narrative structure that built tension and released it in waves, more like a feature film than a TV episode. And I think that's because the specials gave Parker more time. Not 6 days. Probably more like a few weeks per special. And you can feel the difference. The ideas are more fully developed. The jokes land with more precision. The emotional beats hit harder. I've rewatched The End of Obesity 3 times now, and every time I notice something new. A background gag I missed. A line of dialogue that works on multiple levels. That kind of density requires time, and the special format gave Parker and Stone that time for the first time in decades. Which raises an interesting question about the future of the show. Is the best version of South Park the one where they have 6 days and no margin for error? Or is it the one where they have 3 weeks and can actually craft something? I don't think there's a simple answer. The 6-day episodes have an energy, a rawness, that the specials don't quite match. But the specials have a depth that the 6-day episodes can't achieve. The ideal might be what we're getting now, a mix of both. Short seasons of rapid-fire topical episodes, plus a few longer, more thoughtful specials per year. That's what the $1.5 billion deal is buying. Both modes. Both versions of South Park. And that brings us to 2025. And this is where the whole story almost fell apart. In early 2025, Parker and Stone's overall deal with Paramount was approaching its end. The 2021 deal ran through 2027, but negotiations for a new agreement needed to start well in advance. And there was a complication, a massive one. Skydance Media, led by David Ellison, was in the process of acquiring Paramount Global. The merger had been announced, negotiated, renegotiated, and it was dragging on for months. And during that period of corporate uncertainty, Parker and Stone tried to negotiate their next deal. Here's what was on the table. Paramount's co-CEO, Chris McCarthy, had struck a handshake deal with Parker and Stone for a new 10-year overall deal, valued at $3 billion. $3 billion. That would have more than tripled the valuation of their current deal. It would have been, by an enormous margin, the richest deal in television history. Not just cable television, all of television. But Skydance balked. They were about to take over Paramount, and they didn't want to inherit a 10-year, $3 billion commitment to a single property. The duration was the sticking point. Skydance, trying to preserve cash reserves in a volatile media environment, refused to go beyond 5 years. And then things got really ugly. Parker and Stone accused Jeff Shell, the incoming Paramount president under the Skydance regime, of interfering in their contract negotiations. Not just with Paramount, but with other potential buyers. According to reporting from The Hollywood Reporter, Parker and Stone alleged that Shell had reached out to Warner Bros. Discovery and other potential streaming partners during negotiations and tried to modify the terms, including asking for an exclusive 12-month window for new episodes on Paramount Plus and shortening the deal term. Their entertainment company, Park County, sent a threatening letter on June 21st and enlisted Brian Friedman, one of Hollywood's most aggressive entertainment attorneys, to prepare for a potential lawsuit against Skydance leadership. On July 2nd, 2025, Parker and Stone posted their now famous message calling the merger a shit show and saying it was effing up South Park. Season 27, which had been scheduled to premiere, was pushed back 2 weeks to July 23rd. For a moment, it looked like the show might actually go dark. Not because of creative burnout, not because of declining ratings, not because Parker and Stone wanted to stop making it, but because corporate executives at a company they'd never chosen to work with were messing with their deal. I want to stop and paint the picture of what that week was like, because I think the details matter. You have Parker and Stone, two of the most successful creators in entertainment history, sitting in their offices at Park County, their production company, watching a corporate merger that they had nothing to do with threaten everything they'd built. Jeff Shell, a corporate executive they'd never asked to work with, was allegedly reaching out to their potential business partners and trying to modify the terms of deals before they were finalized. Imagine that. You're in the middle of negotiating a multi-billion-dollar contract for your life's work, and some guy from the acquiring company is calling the other parties and trying to change the terms without your permission. Parker and Stone's response was to call Brian Friedman, who is known in Hollywood as the guy you call when you want to go nuclear. Friedman's client list reads like a who's who of talent who's gotten into fights with networks. When Parker and Stone hired him, it sent a signal that they weren't just unhappy. They were ready to litigate. And the social media post on July 2nd was the public-facing version of that signal. Calling a corporate merger a shit show while you're in active negotiations with that corporation is not something people do unless they're willing to walk away. It was a declaration of independence disguised as a social media post. And it worked. And this is the thing that gets me about this whole saga. Parker and Stone have always, from the very first Fox meeting about Mr. Hankey, prioritized creative and business independence. They've structured their careers around never being at the mercy of a corporation. And here they were, 30 years into the most successful partnership in animated television, facing the possibility that a corporate merger they had no part in could dictate the terms of their future. It's the exact kind of situation that South Park would make an episode about, which, honestly, they probably will. But it got resolved, and the way it got resolved is almost as dramatic as the crisis itself. There were reportedly multiple potential bidders circling. Warner Bros. Discovery, despite the ongoing lawsuit, was interested. Netflix was reportedly in the mix. Apple was lurking. Parker and Stone had options, and they were willing to explore all of them, which is exactly what made Shell's alleged interference so explosive. If Parker and Stone could take their show to a competitor, Paramount Plus would lose its most valuable content asset. And if word got out that Paramount's own incoming president was sabotaging the deal, the legal liability would be enormous. The leverage was all on Parker and Stone's side, and they used every bit of it. On July 23rd, 2025, just hours before the season 27 premiere was set to air, Paramount and Park County reached a new deal. 5 years, 50 new episodes, and Paramount Plus became the show's global streaming home for the first time, with all 26 previous seasons available to stream on the platform. The value? $1.5 billion. About $300 million per year. Let me just sit with that number for a second. $300 million a year for South Park. A show that started with construction paper cutouts. A show that was rejected by Fox because of a talking poo character. A show where a kid dies in almost every episode and comes back the next week with no explanation. $300 million a year. And here's the context that makes it even more remarkable. At around the same time, Paramount had canceled The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, reportedly for financial reasons. They were cutting costs everywhere, and they still paid $1.5 billion for South Park, because they literally couldn't afford not to. South Park is Paramount Plus's most valuable content asset. Losing it would have been catastrophic for the platform. I should also point out that Matt Stone said something after the 2025 deal that perfectly encapsulated their position. He said that they can now do whatever they want at Paramount, and that's not just a throwback to the F you money sentiment from the 2021 deal. It's a statement of fact. When you're generating $300 million a year for a streaming platform, when you're the single most valuable content asset in their portfolio, when losing you would be catastrophic for the business, you genuinely can do whatever you want. Nobody's going to tell you to tone it down. Nobody's going to send you network notes about language or subject matter. Nobody's going to ask you to change the ending. Because what are they going to do? Cancel the show that's keeping their platform alive? The financial leverage creates creative freedom. And the creative freedom creates financial leverage. It's a virtuous cycle, and Parker and Stone have been writing it for 30 years. I also want to talk about what the deal structure reveals about the changing economics of television. The 2025 deal is worth about $300 million per year. The 2021 deal was worth about $150 million per year. That's a doubling in 4 years. And the reason for that doubling isn't just inflation or Parker and Stone being tough negotiators, though they are. It's that streaming has become more competitive. Content libraries have become more valuable, and South Park has proven that it drives subscriptions in a way that almost no other property can match. When the pandemic special aired in 2020 and pulled 5.3 million viewers, when the Paramount Plus specials consistently performed at the top of the platform's charts, when The End of Obesity hit #1, those numbers translated directly into subscriber retention data that justifies $300 million a year. And the HBO Max deal expiring was a key piece of the puzzle. Warner Brothers. Discovery's exclusive streaming license had run out, which meant the entire South Park library was suddenly available. Paramount Plus seized the opportunity to bring it home. For the first time ever, one platform would have everything. Every season, every episode, plus new content going forward. And they were willing to pay $1.5 billion for that privilege. That tells you everything about what South Park is worth in 2025. The deal also confirmed something that Forbes had been tracking. In July 2025, Forbes officially estimated that Trey Parker and Matt Stone each have a net worth of approximately $1.2 billion. Billionaires. Both of them. From a cartoon they started making in their dorm room. The path from construction paper to the billionaires list runs directly through that 1997 contract clause, through the 50-50 digital revenue split, through the Hulu deal, the HBO Max deal, the Paramount Plus deals, and through 3 decades of never letting anyone tell them what they could and couldn't put in their show. There's a broader industry point here too that I want to make, because the South Park deal didn't happen in isolation. It happened in the context of a streaming industry that's been going through an identity crisis. For years, the model was simple. Spend insane amounts of money on content, acquire subscribers, worry about profitability later. Netflix pioneered that approach, and every other platform followed. But by 2024 and 2025, the industry had shifted. Profitability mattered again. Subscriber growth was slowing. Platforms were consolidating. And in that environment, the value proposition of known quantities, shows with built-in audiences, proven track records, and massive cultural footprints went through the roof. South Park isn't a gamble. It's a certainty. You know people will watch it. You know it will generate press coverage and social media conversation. You know it will drive subscriptions. In an era where platforms are cutting costs and canceling shows left and right, that certainty is worth a premium. And $300 million a year is that premium. I also think the South Park deal says something important about the relationship between creators and corporations in the streaming age. For most of Hollywood's history, the power has been with the studios and networks. Creators made content, studios owned it, and the revenue flowed upward. But the streaming wars changed that dynamic in a fundamental way. Suddenly, content was the single most important asset a platform could have, and the people who made that content, especially the people who made irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind content, had enormous leverage. South Park is the most extreme example of this shift, but it's not the only one. The deals that Netflix made for Seinfeld and for Ryan Murphy, the deals that Amazon made for Lord of the Rings, the deals that Apple made for their prestige original content, they all reflect the same dynamic. Content is king, and the creators who own their content are the kingmakers. Parker and Stone just happened to see it coming before anyone else, thanks to Kevin Morris and that 1997 clause. I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier about Kevin Morris, because I think his role in this story deserves more attention than it usually gets. Morris wasn't just Parker and Stone's lawyer. He was their strategic partner. He saw things that nobody else in Hollywood was seeing in the late 90s. He understood that television was going to go digital, that content ownership was going to be the most important asset a creator could have, and that the window to secure those rights was narrow. If he'd waited until 2005 or 2006 to try to insert that clause, it would have been too late. Viacom would have known what digital rights were worth. But in 1997, nobody knew. And Morris used that information asymmetry to give his clients a position that would pay off for decades. You know what's funny? Parker and Stone said in an interview once that Morris isn't really like a traditional entertainment lawyer. He's more like a creative partner who happens to have a law degree. And I think that's exactly right. Because the way he structured those deals wasn't just legally sound. It was creative. It was a story in itself, one with a protagonist, an inciting incident, a long second act, and a climax that's still unfolding. And speaking of stories, I want to talk about how the contract battles affected the show itself. Because South Park has never been shy about incorporating its own business drama into its episodes. I already mentioned the Streaming Wars specials, which were blatant commentary on the streaming wars that was making them wealthy. But there's a deeper pattern here. South Park has always been, at its core, a show about power, about who has it, who wants it, and what people will do to get it or keep it. Cartman is a character study in the pursuit of power at any cost. Kyle is the moral counterweight who keeps getting drawn into Cartman's schemes despite knowing better. Randy Marsh, who evolved from a background parent character into what a lot of people consider the show's true lead, is a satire of middle-aged male ambition and reinvention. And the show itself, as a business entity, has been engaged in the same dynamics it satirizes. Parker and Stone versus Comedy Central. Parker and Stone versus Fox. Parker and Stone versus Paramount. Parker and Stone versus Skydance. The creators of a show about power and control have spent 30 years fighting for power and control over their own creation. There's something poetic about that, even if the poetry is covered in fart jokes. I actually have a theory about this that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think the business battles have made the show better. Not just because they give Parker and Stone material to satirize, though they do, but because the constant negotiation, the constant fighting for independence, keeps them invested in a way that most long-running showrunners aren't. When you've been making the same show for nearly 3 decades, burnout is inevitable. But when every few years you have to go to war to protect your creative freedom, it re-energizes you. It reminds you why you're doing this. It makes the show feel like something worth fighting for, not just something you're contractually obligated to produce. And I think you can see that energy in the recent specials. The End of Obesity doesn't feel like a show on autopilot. It feels like a show with something to say, and the freedom to say it. Let me also talk about what the shortened seasons mean for the show's creative direction, because this is something fans have been debating intensely. Remember, Seasons 25 and 26 were both only 6 episodes each, and then season 27, which premiered on July 23rd, 2025, originally was going to have 10 episodes, but was disrupted by the contract drama and only aired 5 episodes before season 28 began in October 2025, also at 5 episodes. So the traditional 14-episode seasons of the classic South Park era are gone. In their place, we have shorter seasons supplemented by feature-length specials on Paramount Plus. Some fans hate this. They want more episodes. They want the classic format back. And I understand that impulse, but I think there's a counter-argument that doesn't get made often enough. The specials are, in many ways, better than regular episodes. They have more room to develop ideas, more production time, more ambitious storytelling. Post-COVID told a story that wouldn't have worked in 22 minutes. The End of Obesity had space to build a genuine argument about healthcare access. And Parker has always said that the 6-day production cycle, while it produces incredible topical satire, is also brutal and limiting. The specials give him more time, more creative room, and presumably a healthier work-life balance. Given that we want this show to continue for as long as possible, maybe fewer episodes and more specials is actually the sustainable model. Maybe the $900 million deal didn't just change the business of South Park. Maybe it changed the show itself, for the better. But there's a philosophical question underneath all of this that I think is worth wrestling with. When a show becomes worth $1.5 billion, does that change the show? Can you still be the scrappy, offensive, equal opportunity satirist when you're a billionaire? Can you still claim to be the outsiders when you're the most valuable property in your network's portfolio? South Park has always positioned itself as the underdog, the show that says what nobody else will, the show that gets in trouble, the show that fights the power. But when you are the power, when your deal is worth more than the entire rest of the network's scripted programming combined, can you still authentically play that role? I think about this a lot, and honestly, I go back and forth. Part of what makes this question so interesting is that South Park has actually addressed it directly. The show has made episodes about selling out, about artistic integrity, about what happens when the counterculture becomes the culture. They're aware of the tension. They've been writing about it for years. And their answer, as much as they have one, seems to be, just keep making the thing you'd want to watch. Don't think about the brand. Don't think about the money. Don't think about whether your billion-dollar deal undermines your ability to mock billionaires. Just make the show. And if the show is good, everything else works out. On one hand, the recent specials suggest that wealth hasn't dulled Parker and Stone's edge. Joining the Panderverse took shots at Disney, one of the most powerful companies in entertainment. Not suitable for children went after OnlyFans culture in ways that could easily alienate younger viewers. The End of Obesity didn't pull any punches with the pharmaceutical industry. These don't feel like the work of creators who've gotten comfortable. On the other hand, there's a degree to which the show's rebelliousness has become its brand, and the brand is worth $1.5 billion. And you start to wonder at what point the rebellion becomes the establishment. I don't have a clean answer. I think that tension is part of what makes South Park fascinating, and I think Parker and Stone are aware of it, because they've always been more self-aware than people give them credit for. Let me talk about something else that happened during the contract saga that deserves attention. Parker and Stone's purchase of Casa Bonita. In 2021, right around the time the $900 million deal was being finalized, they bought Casa Bonita, a legendary Mexican restaurant in Lakewood, Colorado, that had been featured in the South Park Season 7 episode of the same name. The restaurant had closed during the pandemic, and its parent company had filed for bankruptcy. Parker and Stone bought it for $3.1 million, and then proceeded to spend, and this is their own description, infinity dollars on renovations. The original budget was $6.5 million. It ballooned to over $40 million. They hired new chefs, new staff, installed 4 new bars, took 27 tries to get the exact right shade of pink for the exterior. Arthur Bradford, the same director who made 6 Days to Air, documented the renovation in a documentary called Casa Bonita, Mi Amor, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2024. The renovation process itself became a kind of metaphor for how Parker and Stone approach everything. They started with a plan, realized the plan wasn't good enough, scrapped it, started over, spent way more money than they intended, obsessed over details that nobody else would notice, and ended up with something that was simultaneously faithful to the original and dramatically improved. The exterior paint alone tells you everything. 27 tries to get the right shade of pink. Who does that? Who spends that kind of time and money on a shade of pink for a Mexican restaurant? The same people who spend 16 hours rewriting a single joke in a South Park episode. The same people who walked out of Fox over a talking poo character. The same people who spent 4 days arguing about googly eyes on presidential genitals. It's all the same impulse. An obsessive commitment to getting the details right, even when, maybe especially when, the details seem absurd. I bring up Casa Bonita not because it's directly relevant to the contract story, though the timing is, but because it tells you something essential about who Parker and Stone are. They're not normal billionaires. Normal billionaires buy yachts and private islands. Parker and Stone bought a Mexican restaurant from their childhood and spent $40 million making it perfect. That's not a business decision. That's a love letter. And it's the same energy that drives how they approach South Park. They're not doing it for the money anymore, obviously. They're doing it because they love it. And that love is what makes the show still work. 30 years in. You can't fake that. I also want to circle back to the censorship history, because it's deeply intertwined with the contract and creative control story. The most infamous example is episodes 200 and 201, which aired on April 14th and April 21st, 2010, respectively. These were the show's milestone episodes, and they brought back virtually every celebrity South Park had ever mocked in a grand meta-narrative about the power of being immune to ridicule. The central plot involved an attempt to show the Prophet Muhammad on screen. After episode 200 aired, a website for Revolution Muslim posted a warning that Parker and Stone would probably wind up like Theo Van Gogh for airing the show, referencing the Dutch filmmaker who was murdered by an extremist in 2004. When episode 201 aired, Comedy Central had inserted extensive additional censorship into Parker and Stone's final cut, bleeping out all references to Muhammad's name and censoring almost the entirety of 3 consecutive monologues by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus at the end of the episode. Parker and Stone were furious. South Park Studios posted a statement noting that Comedy Central, not the creators, had added the bleeps, and both episodes were subsequently pulled from circulation entirely. They're not available on any streaming platform, not Paramount Plus, not HBO Max, not Amazon, not iTunes. Along with Super Best Friends and the Cartoon Wars 2-parter, they're among the only South Park episodes that have been effectively banned. And here's why this matters for the contract story. Despite having some of the most creator-friendly deals in television history, despite owning 50% of the digital revenue, despite having veto power over streaming deals, Parker and Stone still couldn't prevent Comedy Central from censoring their work when the network felt genuinely threatened. The 1997 clause protected their financial interests brilliantly. But creative control, real creative control, the kind that means nobody can touch your finished product, that was harder to secure. And the censorship of episodes 200 and 201 was a reminder that no matter how much money you make, no matter how much leverage you have, there are limits. When a network fears genuine physical danger to its employees, contracts don't matter. Power dynamics shift, and even the guys who write South Park can't always win. That said, they've won most of the battles. The Scientology episode is a perfect example. Trapped in the Closet aired on November 16th, 2005, as the 12th episode of Season 9. It mocked Scientology extensively, depicted Tom Cruise literally refusing to come out of Stan's closet, and ended with Stan daring Scientology to sue him. After it aired once, Parker and Stone were called into a meeting with Comedy Central executives who wanted to pull the episode because certain producers connected to Mission. Impossible 3, which Cruise was starring in at the time, would prefer it not air again. The church allegedly investigated Parker and Stone's personal lives, and the fallout included Isaac Hayes, the voice of Chef and a Scientologist himself, departing the show. though the story of Hayes' departure is more complicated than people realize. His son, Isaac Hayes III, later said that his father didn't actually quit South Park. He had suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak or make decisions on his own, and people around him, his assistants and inner circle, who were themselves involved in Scientology, quit on his behalf without his knowledge or consent. Parker and Stone have said that they could tell before the episode even aired that Hayes had been sent to ask them to pull it, and they chose not to tell him about it in advance, specifically so he wouldn't be held accountable by the church. There's a sadness to that story that doesn't get talked about enough. Hayes was a beloved member of the South Park family, and the circumstances of his departure were shaped by forces that had nothing to do with the show itself. And the thing about the Scientology battle is that it wasn't a one-off. South Park had been going after powerful targets from the very beginning. They mocked Barbra Streisand in the first season. They had Jesus and Santa fighting on national television. They took on PETA, the Catholic Church, the government of China, Major League Baseball, the entertainment industry itself. The show's entire identity was built on the premise that nobody was off limits. And every time they went after someone powerful and didn't back down, it reinforced that identity. It made the show more valuable, not less. Because audiences knew they could trust South Park to say what other shows wouldn't. That trust is the show's most valuable asset. More valuable than the library. More valuable than the brand. The trust that when you turn on South Park, you're going to get something honest, even if that honesty comes wrapped in crude animation and fart jokes. There's another censorship battle that I want to mention because it's more recent, and it ties directly into the creative control theme. In a later season, Parker and Stone had an episode where they wanted to show Trump's genitals. Comedy Central told them to blur it. Parker's response was to put googly eyes on it and tell the network that since it now had eyes, it was a character, not genitals, and therefore didn't need to be blurred. The network pushed back. Parker pushed harder. This went on for about 4 days before they reached some kind of compromise. But the story itself is just so perfectly South Park. The willingness to spend 4 days arguing about whether googly eyes on a presidential penis constitutes a character design is exactly the energy that has made this show worth $1.5 billion. It's absurd. It's juvenile. And it's fundamentally about refusing to let anyone else dictate your creative choices. The Scientology episode stayed on the air. Comedy Central ultimately didn't pull it permanently. And Parker and Stone's willingness to fight that battle, to risk the wrath of one of the most notoriously litigious organizations in the world, cemented their reputation as creators who genuinely could not be intimidated. That reputation, in turn, made them more valuable. Because networks knew that when they bought South Park, they were buying the realest, most unfiltered voice in television. You can't buy that if the creators are afraid. And Parker and Stone have never, in 30 years, been afraid. They showed up to the 2000 Oscars in dresses. They made a movie about puppets dropping F-bombs. They had Muhammad in a bear suit. They called the Skydance merger a shit show on social media while negotiating a $1 billion deal. Fear is not in their vocabulary. And you know what? I think that fearlessness is actually the single most important factor in the entire financial story. More important than the 1997 clause. More important than the streaming revolution. More important than any individual deal. Because every deal was made possible by the fact that the show was worth something. And the show was worth something because it was fearless. If Parker and Stone had ever backed down, ever softened their approach, ever started pulling punches because they were worried about offending advertisers or alienating sponsors or making corporate partners uncomfortable, the show would have lost the thing that made it special. And a less special show is a less valuable show. The fearlessness isn't separate from the business success. It is the business success. The $900 million deal happened because the show was willing to put Muhammad in a bear suit. The $1.5 billion deal happened because the show was willing to call its own corporate partner's merger a shit show. The willingness to be dangerous is what makes the property safe. That's the paradox, and I don't think any other show in television history embodies it as completely as South Park. I also want to acknowledge something that doesn't get talked about in the financial narrative, which is the personal cost. Making South Park has always been grueling. The 6-day production cycle means Parker works around the clock during production. He's talked about the stress, about the creative anxiety, about the nights where he's staring at a script at 3 in the morning, wondering if the episode is any good. 6 days to air captures this beautifully. You see Parker in his office, exhausted, surrounded by half-eaten food, revising dialogue for the 15th time. It's not glamorous. It's not what people imagine when they hear billion-dollar deal. It's a guy in a room, alone with a script, trying to make something good. And he's been doing that every week for nearly 30 years. The money doesn't make the creative process easier. If anything, it might make it harder, because the stakes are higher, the expectations are greater, and the pressure to justify a $300 million a year deal is immense. Parker has been pretty open about dealing with anxiety and creative doubt throughout his career. The fact that he keeps showing up, keeps doing the work, keeps caring about whether each episode is good enough. That's the real story underneath all the contract negotiations and deal valuations. Let me also talk about Deep Voodoo, because it represents the next chapter in Parker and Stone's evolution as creative entrepreneurs. Deep Voodoo is an AI-based visual effects studio they founded in 2020. It specializes in deepfake technology, using artificial intelligence to create hyper-realistic face-swapping effects for entertainment purposes. They originally assembled a team of artists for a feature film about Donald Trump, creating a 14-minute comedy short called Sassy Justice that featured a deep-faked Trump voiced by Peter Serafinowicz. That short went viral in October 2020. They pivoted the company from a single-project studio to a broader VFX provider, and in December 2022, Deep Voodoo secured $20 million in funding. The technology was used in Kendrick Lamar's music video for The Heart Part 5, where Lamar's face morphs into those of O.J. Simpson, Nipsey Hussle, Kobe Bryant, and others. More recently, the technology has been used on the Apple TV Plus series Before and the second season of the Peacock series Ted. Why does this matter for the South Park story? Because it shows where Parker and Stone are heading. They're not just South Park guys. They're not even just South Park and Book of Mormon guys. They're building a technology company at the cutting edge of AI-generated visual effects. And the $1.5 billion Paramount deal gives them the financial freedom to invest in Deep Voodoo without any pressure to make it immediately profitable. It's the same philosophy as the 1997 contract clause. Bet on the future. Build something that might not pay off for years. And when it does pay off, own 50% of it. Kevin Morris would be proud. There's one more thing about Deep Voodoo that I think is worth mentioning. The Kendrick Lamar collaboration is significant, not because of the money, although I'm sure it was lucrative, but because of what it represents. Parker and Stone's deepfake technology was used in one of the most critically acclaimed and culturally impactful music videos of 2022. Lamar's face morphing into those of other famous black men while he raps about identity, legacy, and violence. That's not a gimmick. That's art facilitated by technology. And it shows that Parker and Stone's vision for Deep Voodoo isn't just about comedy or South Park adjacent content. They see it as a legitimate visual effects tool that can serve the entire entertainment industry. If Deep Voodoo becomes the industry standard for AI-driven VFX, which is a real possibility given the trajectory, then Parker and Stone will have built a second-generational business alongside South Park. And the South Park money, the $1.5 billion Paramount deal money, is what's funding that ambition. Everything feeds into everything else. I'm also thinking about the 2000 Oscars, because it's one of my favorite Parker and Stone stories, and it says everything about their approach to institutional power. They showed up to the Academy Awards in dresses. Jennifer Lopez dresses, specifically. Stone wore a recreation of her iconic green Versace gown. They were nominated for an Oscar. They were attending the biggest night in Hollywood, and they decided to show up in drag. It was funny. It was attention-getting. But it was also a statement. It said, "We don't take your institutions seriously. We don't play by your rules. We're going to make fun of this ceremony while we're at it." And 2 decades later, the guys who showed up to the Oscars in dresses are billionaires with more creative power than most studio heads. There might be a lesson there about what happens when you refuse to be impressed by the establishment. Or maybe the lesson is just that it's funnier when you wear a dress. Okay, I want to step back and look at the whole picture. Because when you lay out the financial history of South Park chronologically, the trajectory is almost incomprehensible. 1997, a small deal with Comedy Central for 6 episodes. The clause worth nothing. 1998, the first long-term contract. Merchandising already generating $150 million in revenue. The clause still worth nothing. 1999, the movie grosses $83 million, an Oscar nomination. South Park is a franchise. 2007, the clause wakes up. 50-50 digital revenue, split. South Park Digital Studios formed. 2014, Hulu deal worth more than $80 million. Parker and Stone's share, approximately $40 million. 2019, HBO Max deal worth over $500 million. Parker and Stone's share, approximately $250 million. 2021, the Paramount deal worth $900 million over 6 years. 14 movies. Extensions through season 30. 2025, the new Paramount deal. 5 years. 50 episodes. $1.5 billion. $300 million per year. Parker and Stone confirmed as billionaires. From construction paper to billionaires in 28 years. That's not just a success story. That's the most unlikely financial trajectory in entertainment history. And it was all built on a foundation of creative integrity, strategic contract negotiation, and a refusal to let anyone else control the art. And you know what kills me about that timeline? Look at the acceleration. From 1997 to 2014, 17 years, the biggest deal was the Hulu agreement at $80 million. From 2014 to 2019, 5 years, it jumped to $500 million with HBO Max. From 2019 to 2021, just 2 years, it went to $900 million with Paramount. And from 2021 to 2025, 4 years, it hit $1.5 billion. The value isn't just increasing, it's increasing at an increasing rate. Every deal is bigger than the last, and the gap between deals is getting shorter. That's exponential growth, and it's happening because each deal builds on the infrastructure of the previous one. The HBO Max deal proved the show's streaming value. That proof justified the higher Paramount deal. The Paramount deal's success justified the even higher 2025 deal. And each deal comes with more leverage for Parker and Stone, which means better terms, which means more money, which means more leverage for the next negotiation. It's a flywheel that's been spinning faster and faster for 3 decades, and there's no sign it's slowing down. I also want to mention something about the total value of the South Park franchise that doesn't get enough attention. When you add up everything, the television advertising revenue over 30 years, the merchandising, the syndication, the movie box office, the video games, the Hulu deal, the HBO Max deal, the 2 Paramount deals, the licensing, the international distribution, you're looking at a franchise that has generated well over $3 billion in total revenue. Some estimates put it closer to $4 or $5 billion. For a show that costs a fraction of what most comparable franchises cost to produce. The profit margins on South Park are genuinely absurd, and half of that digital revenue, billions of dollars worth, has flowed to Parker and Stone through South Park Digital Studios. One sentence in a 1997 contract, billions of dollars. That's the Kevin Morris story. That's the sentence that launched a dynasty. And before I look forward, I want to look at one more number, because I think it puts everything in perspective. As of December 2025, 338 episodes of South Park have aired across 28 seasons, including 7 Paramount Plus specials. 338 episodes. That's nearly 250 hours of content. A quarter of a millennium of television, if that makes any sense, all created primarily by 2 people. That's a body of work that almost nobody else in entertainment can match. The Simpsons has more episodes, sure, but that show has had dozens of writers over the years, rotating casts of showrunners, and a production process that's fundamentally collaborative in a way that dilutes individual creative ownership. South Park's body of work belongs to Trey Parker and Matt Stone in a way that most television shows don't belong to anyone. Every episode has their fingerprints on it. Every joke was approved by them. Every satirical target was chosen by them. That creative ownership is what makes the financial ownership possible. You can't pay someone else to make South Park, and that's why the deals keep getting bigger. I keep thinking about the future, because the 2025 deal runs through 2030. 50 new episodes, presumably more specials, and South Park will be entering its mid-30s as a series. Very few shows in television history have lasted that long. The Simpsons is the obvious comparison, and South Park will likely surpass it in cultural relevance if it hasn't already, depending on who you ask. The question is whether the show can maintain its quality and relevance in a media environment that's changing faster than ever. AI is reshaping content creation. Streaming platforms are consolidating. Audiences are fragmenting. The things that made South Park uniquely valuable, its speed, its topicality, its willingness to say what nobody else will, those things still matter. But will they matter as much in 2030 as they do in 2025? I think they will. And I've thought about this more than is probably healthy while putting this video together. But here's why. South Park's value has never been primarily about any individual episode or any individual joke. And if you want proof of that, look at how the show performs compared to newer animated comedies that are technically more polished, have bigger writing staffs, and get more marketing support. None of them can match South Park's cultural impact. None of them generate the same level of conversation. None of them have the same pull with streaming subscribers. Because what makes South Park valuable isn't production values or marketing budgets. It's the relationship between the creators and the audience. It's about the trust that when something insane happens in the world, Parker and Stone will have something to say about it within a week. It's about the knowledge that when you turn on South Park, you're going to get something real. Something that hasn't been focus grouped or sanitized or approved by a committee of executives. That relationship is irreplaceable. You can't AI generate it, even though the irony of saying that about a show whose creators literally run a deepfake AI company is not lost on me. You can't corporate strategy it into existence. It exists because two specific human beings have been doing this specific thing for 30 years, and they still care about it, and you can tell. The Skydance drama, for all the stress it caused, actually proved something important. It proved that South Park's value isn't just about the content. It's about the creators. When Parker and Stone threatened to walk away, when they pushed back season 27's premiere, the response from Paramount was immediate. They needed a deal. They needed it fast. And they were willing to pay $1.5 billion to get it. Because South Park without Parker and Stone isn't South Park. It's just a brand. And the brand without the creators behind it is worth nothing, close to $1.5 billion. Paramount understood that, and that's why the deal got done. If you've stuck with me this far, you already know this isn't just a video about contracts and dollar amounts. It's a story about what it means to own your work. About what happens when two guys who just wanted to make each other laugh with crude construction paper cartoons end up at the center of a multi-billion-dollar corporate chess game. About the fact that the most powerful position in any negotiation is the willingness to walk away. Parker and Stone have always been willing to walk away. From Fox, when they wouldn't let them have Mr. Hanky. From Comedy Central, when the network tried to tell them what they could and couldn't satirize. From Paramount, when the Skydance merger threatened their independence. That willingness, that fundamental refusal to need any particular deal more than the deal needs them, is what has made them billionaires. And there's one more thing I want to leave you with before we wrap up. The Warner Brothers Discovery lawsuit was still working its way through the courts when the 2025 Paramount deal was signed. The HBO Max streaming rights had expired, which cleared the way for Paramount Plus to become the exclusive streaming home. But the legal questions raised by that lawsuit haven't been fully answered. Can you restructure content delivery to avoid contractual obligations by calling episodes something else? Can a streaming platform claim exclusivity over a franchise and then watch helplessly as the franchise creates an entirely new category of content for a competitor? These questions matter beyond South Park. They'll shape how every major content deal is structured going forward. South Park, once again, is at the frontier. Not just of comedy, not just of animation, but of the business of entertainment itself. And I want to leave you with one last thought about the Warner Brothers Discovery lawsuit, because I think it encapsulates the entire South Park business story in miniature. Here's a $500 million deal that was supposed to give HBO Max exclusive access to South Park. And it fell apart because nobody could agree on what the word episode means. That's South Park in a nutshell. Serious amounts of money being fought over with absurd semantic arguments. The show's entire creative philosophy has always been to find the ridiculous core inside serious subjects. War, religion, politics, identity, they all become funnier and more insightful when you strip away the pretension and look at what's really going on underneath. And the show's business history follows the same pattern. Billions of dollars, corporate mergers, legal battles, and at the center of all of it, a fight over whether a 50-minute piece of animated content starring paper cutout kids is a movie or an episode. Trey Parker couldn't have written it better himself. The story isn't over. It's not going to be over for a long time. Parker and Stone are in their mid-50s. They have the money to do anything they want. And what they want to do, apparently, is keep making South Park. Keep running Deep Voodoo. Keep operating Casa Bonita with its 27 shades of pink exterior. And keep being the two guys who refuse to let anyone tell them what they can and can't say. The 2025 deal takes the show through its 32nd season at least. By then, South Park will have been on the air for more than 35 years. It started as a dorm room project made with paper and glue. It became the most valuable animated franchise on cable television. It generated over $1.5 billion in streaming rights alone. It survived censorship battles, death threats, corporate mergers, streaming wars, a global pandemic, and the complete transformation of the television industry. And it did all of that while remaining, fundamentally, a show about 4 8-year-old kids who swear too much and live in a town where nothing makes sense. Look, I know I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to understanding everything about this story. South Park works because it's authentic. The money, the contracts, the corporate warfare, all of that only matters because the show itself still matters. And the show only matters because Parker and Stone still care about making it. The day they stop caring is the day it's all worth nothing, no matter how many billion-dollar deals are on the table. That's the paradox of South Park's value. It's worth $1.5 billion precisely because the guys who make it would burn the whole thing down before they'd let it become something they're not proud of. The willingness to destroy the thing is what makes the thing indestructible. Think about that. There's a lot of uncertainty ahead. Streaming will keep changing. Paramount itself might look completely different in 5 years under Skydance leadership. The entertainment industry is being reshaped by AI, by shifting audience habits, by the constant churn of platforms launching and merging and shutting down. But if I had to bet on anyone navigating that chaos, I'd bet on the guys who've been doing it for 3 decades. The guys who turned a viral Christmas card into a global franchise. The guys who stuck a clause in a contract before the internet existed and turned it into billions. The guys who walked out of Fox over a talking poo character and never looked back. Whatever comes next, Parker and Stone will have something to say about it. They always have. From construction paper to the biggest deal in television history, they've never not had something to say. And they'll say it in 6 days or less, with construction paper textures and dot eyes and terrible language and more heart than anyone expects. That's the formula. That's always been the formula. And somehow, after nearly 3 decades and over $1.5 billion in streaming revenue, the formula still works. I don't think it's ever going to stop working. Not as long as those two guys keep showing up to the studio on Thursday morning, sleep-deprived and caffeinated and ready to make something that makes them laugh. That's where the money comes from. That's where it's always come from. I started making this video thinking it would be a straightforward financial history. How much money, who paid whom, what the deal terms were. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized that the financial story is inseparable from the creative story, the personal story, the cultural story. Every dollar in every deal traces back to a creative decision somebody made. The decision to walk out of Fox. The decision to hire Kevin Morris. The decision to keep the construction paper aesthetic. The decision to produce episodes in 6 days. The decision to serialize in season 19. The decision to fight Scientology and not blink. The decision to call a merger a shit show on social media. Every single one of those decisions was a creative choice that had financial consequences. And that's the real lesson of the South Park billion-dollar war. In entertainment, business and art aren't separate things. They're the same thing viewed from different angles. And the people who understand that, who make creative choices that happen to be brilliant business moves, and business choices that happen to be brilliantly creative, those are the people who end up with $1.5 billion deals. Parker and Stone might not think about it that way. They've always said they just make stuff that makes them laugh. But whether they think about it or not, the result speaks for itself. 2 kids who made a Christmas card out of construction paper became the highest paid creators in television history. And they did it without ever compromising the thing that made them worth paying in the first place. Thanks for being here tonight. I mean that. Whether you watched the whole thing or whether you drifted off somewhere around the HBO Max lawsuit, which, honestly, fair enough. That part was dense. I appreciate you spending your time with us. This channel exists because of people like you, and I never take that for granted. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which part of the South Park business saga surprised you most, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.